Okay, the comrades and I are beginning to read Engels's book called The Dialectics of Nature, and it is so funny. At the very beginning, Engels keeps on cracking jokes, and at the expense of the scientists of his day, and apart from being entertaining, it is actually a very relevant book to the modern times, so I highly, highly recommend you read it. Obviously, everybody needs to learn more about dialectics because it is the type of logic that is necessary for us to use in order to understand the movement of the substance. Formal logic has its limitations. You cannot apply formal logic to the vast majority of natural laws, actually, because it only gives you the binaries, right? It only gives you one or the other, either or. Yes, of course, there are some laws to movement, and there are some formal logic achievements that we are using and we should be using, and some Marxist scholars, I believe, said that we should be very, very knowledgeable in the area of formal logic, but then only dialectical logic is going to provide for us a framework to actually understand the material world. And in this book, I believe Engels is going to introduce us to more of these concepts and more of the dialectics. Now, the first chapter, just as I said, cracks a lot of jokes at the expense of the very famous scientists of Engels' day, but it is done for a reason. Engels wants to showcase how easy it is to slip into metaphysical and idealist thinking if your framework is purely empirical. So the criticism of empiricism is probably very familiar to anyone who read Lenin, because Lenin has this very famous work which is called The Critique of Imperial Criticism, I believe, or something along these lines. It's a pretty funny title. But other than that, Engels in this book, The Dialectics of Nature, in the very first chapter, already points out some of the flaws of empiricism, or pure empiricism, as he calls it, or naked empiricism in some translations. This is when you, as a researcher, purely rely on your senses, and thus you can actually come to grandiose conclusions about the world outside of yourself, not taking into account that your senses and human senses overall, they're not a great measure of the truth. And in order to actually understand the truth, you have to use dialectical logic. This is what Engels postulates, and in this work and in many of his works. But the empiricism by itself is a limiting framework to this day, because not only can we not perceive the world objectively through our senses, but also the kind of conclusions we come to, they are necessarily ideological because of all of the prehistory that we have had, all of the history that we have had, but also because we are interpreting what happens, right? When you use empirical data, it's not like you just present the data and that's it. That's the end of the story, period. No, you interpret the data. As a scientist, you have to come to conclusions. And of course, if you go to any websites like PubMed or NCBI or any of those websites that do give you access, or JSTOR, whatever, that give you access to academic papers and scientific papers, you see this disclaimer everywhere. More research is necessary. We cannot make any kind of sweeping generalizations. We cannot come to any kind of grandiose conclusion. Such disclaimers are present in most of the papers. And on one hand, it is great that empirical science does, and the people who operate it and the people who are in charge of it, they realize the limitations. But on the other hand, it is the principles, the logic of your method that you apply to any data in order to understand it. And there's so many examples, and of course people like examples. So you probably have heard of many of the studies, psychological studies included, where people are asked certain questions and then people may be tested, but this already imposes huge limitations. who are these people? What kind of socioeconomic background do they have? What time of the day is it? What kind of a background these people have? What is the geographical location of these people? What is the time period? What is the kind of time period personally for these people that may switch up, change up the way they respond to all kinds of stimuli? So a lot of these factors, they change so often, and sometimes they may change in such subtle ways that coming to conclusions based off of such data is going to be very, very limiting. And I'm not just talking about surveys. Obviously, surveys are going to be very, very biased because everybody is going to impose their own ideological framework onto the questions. Even the way we understand questions really depends on so many different factors. But also, just as I said, time of the day, whether the person ate or whether the person feels good, whether the person's healthy, etc., etc., all of these factors are going to play a major role, not only in how they're going to respond to the survey, but also how they're going to respond to the other types of stimuli. So even if you check for all kinds of variables, you're still not going to be able to get the full picture. It is still this one moment in time that you're recording and reporting on. And time of the people's history does not consist of linear moments. It is not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The time of the people's history, and I'm not talking about time as a philosophical concept, I'm talking about time as a concept applicable to human beings. So it is not linear and it is cyclical. So dialectics actually look at the cycles, it looks at the trends, it looks at the contradictions, at the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, it looks at the movement of the substance. But formal logic, it looks at the linear history, it looks at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that is a very limiting framework. It is applicable in some areas of study, and as far as I know, in mathematics, formal logic is very helpful, but in the vast majority of human applied sciences, it is not going to really serve you best. So this is why learning about dialectics is important. It is absolutely essential. So starting with a work such as Engels's Dialectics of Nature, I think is a great start for anyone, whether you have never heard about dialectics or you already know a little bit of something, or even if you know much, I think it's still going to be worth visiting and revisiting. It is still going to be worth a read. And again, it is entertaining. And the fact that Engels makes fun of these scientists to showcase the tendencies of empiricism and how it very quickly delves back into metaphysical or mythological type of thinking. This is also a good reminder to us, the modern people, because it's still happening to this day. And oftentimes people may dismiss such concerns, thinking that mythological thinking or magical thinking is only going to affect the people who are less educated, the people who may be of lower socioeconomic standing than they themselves are. And that is not the case. Every one of us is going to start thinking magically if we are brought up surrounded by mythological narratives. And most of ideological narratives are mythological. They're not based on reality. They're based on preconceived notions and ideas that are dictated by the material circumstances, and they are meant to replicate the conditions of production. They kind of happen automatically. We justify things in the way the world is. We want to believe that the world makes sense. So we start mythologizing. We start seeing patterns where they may not exist. And this is why a dialectical framework is so much more useful, because it doesn't look at the world as it perceives the world. It looks for the patterns, and it recognizes the movement of history that started a long time ago, and it goes all the way back and it travels to the future because it knows it. Well, the dialectic does know. The people who study the world using the dialectical method, we realize that time is not linear, and we're able to perceive the world differently because of this framework, and we're able to relate to the world differently because of this framework. And this is something that I've been talking about for a long time. So let me know if you're interested in talking more about this. I will be sharing little tidbits out of this book as we go on and read it with the comrades. I'm going to post a new video probably on Patreon on Sunday. So if you're interested, go check it out. If you're able to support me, go ahead and do that. Of course, take care of yourself and your community first and foremost. Subscribe to all my other social medias. I'm going to be doing a little something every now and again. Otherwise, I hope you have a great day today, and I'll talk to you sometime later.